We are going to be picking up with the 1920s, but before I start with that, I wanted to mention on behalf of the clerk's office, we now have Facebook. We're on Facebook now, finally. So if you want to follow us, we will post things like closures for the courthouse, for the clerk's office, scams, employment opportunities. These history presentations are up there to remind people about them, and whatever else that we post on there. So if you want to follow us, you can go to our website, suwgov.org, I believe. .gov. I just forgot the website. suwgov.org. We'll try that. Suwannee County Clerk's Office website. And there's Facebook at the bottom. You click on that, follow us, and we can go from there. So, 1920s. Maybe, there we go. Computer's going slow today. So, this is a map of Suwannee County in 1920. You probably have noticed that the first map of this presentation, or any presentation, is the last map of the presentation before. But this is a map of 1920 showing several locations, less than we had in the teens in the early 1900s, because more and more people are getting vehicles and are able to drive further, so we don't have all those little communities that we used to have. So there are less communities here on the 1920 map, and at the end of this presentation, you'll see there's even less. Because, to be honest, a lot of these communities on the map are basically just a dot on the map, maybe one store. There's not much to some of the places like Nebo or Kirkland or Starr or Mercer. They're on railroad lines, some of which have just recently shut down as of the 1920 map. And so the people are starting to move away, but it's still showing on the maps. But despite that, our population was about 20,000. And we were one of the largest exporters of cotton, peanuts, corn, hogs, and pecans or pecans, however you want to say it. And that was one of our, those were some of our biggest producing items that we had in agriculture anyway. One thing I did find this morning, I was going through some records and saw that in April of 1920, there was an advertisement basically in the Suwannee Democrat, and it was from several businesses, especially of the downtown Live Oak area, and they had agreed that come summer, like for 3 or 4 months during the summertime, they were going to close up shop Thursdays at 1 p.m. to allow their employees to enjoy basically the summer. So it's like, that's nice, wish they'd do that now. But they don't. But that was kind of funny to see that. But that allowed people to go to the Springs. I was going to try to put a picture of the Springs, but it didn't pull up.
Just for the afternoon.
Just for that afternoon, yeah, just for Thursday afternoons for some reason. Thursday at 1, their fleets and a whole bunch of others were shutting down. Go enjoy the afternoon off somewhere, wherever you want to go, the Springs, or go out with a loved one, or go home and rest, whatever. So thought that was pretty nice. They did that for several years off and on. Dr. J.M. Berkeley, who was a longtime local druggist and doctor, he had a shop there on Howard Street. That's a picture from the earlier 1900s, 111 West Howard Street. So downtown. Afternoon, glad y'all are here. But he had been a long-time druggist. That's him in the bow tie, the older gentleman. But he passed away in June of 1920. And I mention that because a few years ago, I was given a box, a shoebox full of items belonging to Dr. Berkeley and his wife. It had been like in an attic, I guess it was an old house, or some of his descendants' houses. And so it was given to me. Interesting thing, things like eyeglasses, like the fancy eyeglasses that you might wear at like an opera, you know, those kind of, you see in some of the movies, the old-timey movies. Let's see, keepsake, lots of photographs, pretty interesting, although most of them I don't know who they are because nobody wrote on them. Got lots of those that just, okay, there's a person, there's a guy, there's a girl, that's about all I can tell you. And they're old and they're dead. That's all I can tell you on some of them. But one of the interesting things was there's a little keepsake about yay big, about coin sized, and it has a swastika on it. It's like a good luck charm. The Good Luck Charm Club, I believe is what it was called, because this is before the era of the Nazi Party. So at this point in world history, it's basically a Hindu good luck charm. It's a symbol for good luck. It's not anything to do with the Nazi Party because that did not exist at this point. So that's kind of interesting to show people that. It was going to rain today, so I didn't bring it, sorry. But he had passed away, so he was one of our local druggists for many years. As he's dying, we've got a new family moving into Suwannee County. And I don't normally mention families too much just for family's sake, but Mike Sacrios moved here in 1920, and for about 50 years they were the only Greek family in Suwannee County. So that was their claim to fame. One of their claims to fame is they were our only Greek family for about 50 years. Now, Mike Sacrios operated several things, a grocery and a restaurant. The most known one was called the Seminole Cafe, which was on the corner of, the southeast corner of Howard and Ohio, where Helmston's is today. That was the Seminole Cafe. So it was a grocery shop. It was also a restaurant to come in and eat. One thing he did, lots of good things he did, but one of the things he would do is at the end of every year, the last day of the year, all the proceeds that were, from things that were bought were given to like the orphanages, like that Advent Christian. And so he was very big in the community. He also helped to provide for the sports teams. You can see all throughout our records, newspapers anyway, where he would provide food for the football team or the baseball team or whatever sport was going on that time. He was very big in that. Also civic groups, Rotary, Kiwanis, those things that he would provide food for their various events. And so he was honored by those groups and many other people over the years. And their son, Nicky Sacrios, pretty much was the same thing. He was the same way, supported a lot of local groups, local civic organizations. I was in Kiwanis with him before he passed away, several years ago. Kerry A. Hardy. I think I've mentioned him briefly before in a couple spots, but Kerry Hardy was born in 1876 in Taylor County. He moved to Live Oak in Suwannee County in 1900 as a lawyer, established a law firm, but he also dabbled in lots of other businesses, banks, and such. Well, in 1915, he was elected to the House of Representatives, and then he served as the Speaker of the House for 2 years, which at the time was unprecedented. Usually it was just 1 year and you're out. Well, he served for 2 years. In 1920, which is the decade we're looking at, he was elected governor of Florida. Governor of Florida. So during that tenure, he only served one term. Several things happened. We had a lot of population growth coming into Florida. People realized with the railroads and now the better roads for people to drive in, let's move to Florida. Let's move to the beach. Let's move to wherever it is. But let's move into Florida. So that population growth necessitated several new counties being established. One of those was called Hardy County. So he's the namesake for Hardy County. He also helped to establish, or during his tenure, the state highway system was established. And one of the guys he picked to kind of head it up was a local boy named W.J. Hillman, Captain Hillman. We've talked about him before. He was, at one point, was head over the convicts. We talked about probably 4 or 5 months ago now. But he was head of the convicts. He was big into a lot of industries. And he was the guy that was a stickler for better roads. He was the one that I believe I talked to y'all about, that he would kind of get upset with people if they left a stump in the road. So he'd get on to them, say, you bring an axe and you chop that thing out of the way so you don't mess up other vehicles. So W.J. Hillman was a kind of a natural to be selected to help head up this road department. Also during Kerry Hardy's tenure, the state park system was set up. State monuments, lots of different monuments, some for the Civil War, but for just general state monuments, historical markers, popped up during his tenure. Also the state convict lease system, which we've talked about several times over the years, or over the months. The state convict lease system was abolished, and I'll talk about why in just a second. So when he retired from politics in that part of life, he served as president of the commercial bank here in Live Oak from 1926 to 1950. He helped organize a lot of other banks and helped to buy out several banks, especially local banks. So he was big into things around here. This was Kerry Hardy's house. This is after he passed away, but it was located across the street from the Hardy's restaurant. People ask me all the time, no, it's not the same Hardy's. Just happened to be across the street. But when it was built in the early 1900s, in this era we're looking at, that was thought of being way out of town. Okay. part of our downtown area now, but that was way out of town in the early 1900s.
Is it where the TD Bank or?
Yes, it's where the TD Bank is today. Yeah, I think it was actually the bank he owned after he passed away. They tore his house down and put a new bank there. Or maybe it was his competitor. One of the two. Anyway, bank got put up. It's been several names over the years. I talked about the end of convict leasing during Hardy's term, and it happened because of this young man here. His name was Martin Tabert. He lived in North Dakota, and what happened was he was arrested in Leon County because he had hopped on a freight train, or on a train and not paid for it. So he was ordered to pay $25 and $25 of court cost. You send us the payment, we'll let you go. Well, the family, the parents, mailed it to Leon County, but they never got the money. Probably sent cash. Oops. So what happened was this young man who should have just been out within a day or two, within a few days, stayed in jail, and instead of keeping him in jail, they put him to work in the convict camp system. Now, he was a short-termer. He should have just stayed in the jail, to be honest. But I guess they needed workers out in the swamps, cutting timber and turpentine, so they put him on one of the work crews over in Dixie County, and they worked him. Very soon after that, he was not from here. He wasn't used to the climate and the weather, and plus it's the swamps. So he had fevers, headaches, oozing sores. He was getting pretty bad off, very sick. Well, the guy in charge kept working him up until the point where he could no longer work. The guy in charge propped him up on a tree and then whipped him because he was not putting in a day's work. Flogged him 50 times, those kinds of things. So basically one night he was left unconscious in his bunk after all that, and he died. Well, because of that incident, because of the national uproar, the convict lease system here in Florida ended. And to be honest, it was ending in other states too. It wasn't just Florida, but those kinds of flagrant violations of people's rights and just being mean, just cruel.
Mean.
Yeah, this was beyond you owe us. Whether it was for boarding a train or not, it was way over the top. And so things like that caused the end of the convict leasing system. But this happened during Hardy's tenure. Also, I think Rosewood happened during Hardy's tenure, where the African-American community of Rosewood was destroyed. So some not good things happening during Hardy's term, but also lots of good things. And it wasn't, don't think it was his fault. It's just he was governor. Moving on, Suwannee High sports. By 1921, Suwannee High anyway had its first soccer team, which supposedly was the first soccer team in Florida. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I have read that all my life. At one point, I had been told, and I've read in different locations, that it was our first sports team at Suwannee High, but I don't think so. I think we had a baseball team before that, so I've stopped saying that, although in the past I know I have. I think I've written it in some books. But that's what happens when you listen to somebody's second or third hand writings instead of going back to the original.
Current news.
Yeah, pretty much. So it happens sometimes. But by 1921, we did have a soccer team. And this was at a time when just in Suwannee County, we had 102 schools. Most of them being one room, 5 to 15 pupils. But Suwannee High was the biggest school. And so we were able to put up the sports team. And that soccer team won the state championship the next year. Probably because there weren't a lot of teams, because they were the first in Florida, apparently. They did play the University of Florida. And they tied. Now, one thing about this that is not appropriate in today's society is their nickname. We're the Suwannee High Bulldogs. Their nickname was the Fighting Hebrews, because there were several Jewish members on the team. And so that was what they were called, the Fighting Hebrews. And just one of those things. Some of the folks on there, you may recognize their names if you've been around here long enough. Future lawyer Alfred T. Erith is on there. I think he's the guy in the front, center, holding the ball. Alfred T. Erith, I remember him as a young man. My mom worked for him. And so I would see him. Of course, he was ancient by then. But he's on there. Also, Louis Wadsworth, who was the future publisher for the Suwannee Democrat, and he also was in charge of the Florida National Guard at one point in the 60s. especially. So several prominent folks, local folks, I think Horry Hare was on there too at some point, who was a politician, state politician also. But anyway, the Fighting Hebrews, can't call them that today, but that's what they were then. Organizations, the 1920s saw several new organizations being established, including the Rotary and Kiwanis. Here in Suwannee County, anyway. The Rotary Club in May of 1921, the Valdosta Rotary Club, came down to Suwannee County, and they were looking to plan a new Rotary Club here in Suwannee County. And so they talked to George Allison, who was one of our local businessmen. And he kind of helped spearhead this. And so the first meeting was held on June 28th, 1921, with 18 members. And so that was established, did a lot of good. It's actually the third oldest Rotary Club in the state of Florida. So that shows, even though Live Oak was no longer the fifth largest city in the state like it had been 15 years prior to that, but it still shows how much in politics and how much in business that Live Oak and Suwannee County still had. So third oldest in Florida. Also the Kiwanis Club in 1924. It was chartered with 36 members, and they focus on community, lots of different things, especially the children. And the Rotary focuses on lots of things. These good service organizations that we still have today. Another organization that was, I guess, reestablished would be a better phrase, is the Chamber of Commerce. It was organized in June of 1925. Now that replaced an earlier group that was called a Board of Trade that we talked about probably 2 or 3 months ago. And they've been established by 1908 or so. But probably because of World War I and most of the folks being off serving, I guess it had kind of died off. And so this Chamber of Commerce was reestablished in 1920, what was I say, 26? 25, excuse me. Other things going on. Local manufacturers. The Mizell Evans Company, later just called Mizell's, was one of the producers of Suwannee syrup, which was local cane syrup grown locally. Anybody ever been a part of that? Cane grinder and all that stuff? Grew up doing that, my great-grandparents, up until they passed away in the early 2000s. It's kind of fun. And I told the Dowling Partner Group last week when I was talking about this, although I was born and bred here, and I went to many of these things, I never really developed a taste for the syrup. Now the polecat, I like the polecat. You know what polecat is? All right. So for those of you who've never been to a cane grinding, you basically cook the sugar cane in a big vat, huge, 3, 4, 5 foot wide vat. You cook it, and as it heats up, it starts spitting out impurities. That's a good way to use it. But also, some of the sugary stuff will coat the edges, and it will cool, and it will form what we call around here anyway, polecat. And it's like a sugary candy, and when it hardens. So I would love to eat that. You get a piece of sugar cane, scoop it off. It's kind of like taffy. You just eat it off. Make sure it's a little cool, not too hot. Been there and done that. But it was good. But the syrup, it was just, I don't know. I'm not much of a syrup person. But anyway,
It always tasted kind of green to me.
Do what?
It always tasted kind of green to me, compared to like maple syrup.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different flavor. It's an acquired taste.
It's an acquired taste, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I probably still have in my house. I still got probably from the last year my great-grandparents did it. But there are a few folks around Thanksgiving. That was our big Thanksgiving thing.
Mm-hmm.
They still do it around the county. I know there's a county employee that does it or used to. So anyway, but that was done a lot more back in the 20s. And so Mizell Evans Company was one of the places that would sell it. According to this advertisement, it was made in the old Suwannee River plantation, which again is not something you could probably say today. All right. The Masonic Lodge had been a part of Live Oak before Live Oak was even established or incorporated as a town, way back. And technically even before Suwannee was a county, we had a Masonic Lodge somewhere in the county. Well, when the Masonic Lodge came into Live Oak, they built probably the structure on the left, which is labeled as an opera house, which it could have been used as over the years, or this could be a nearby structure. Either way, it was a two-story wooden building on the southwest corner of Duval and Ohio, across from the Chamber of Commerce, which is the old City Hall. They had this structure built in the 1880s. It also not only served as a lodge, but also it was pretty much where the town of Live Oak had its town hall for many years before they built the Chamber of Commerce building that we have today. It also was the armory for the local militia group, and it served a couple of churches over the years. I think the Episcopal and Presbyterian at one point. So it was served for different things. But by 1922, the building was old and needed to be replaced. And so they built the structure on the right, two-story brick building, and it lasted for over 50 years. And then a second story either burned or was torn down. I've got a picture or two somewhere that shows it just as a one-story building. And then it was torn down. There's nothing left there. It's an open spot. I think First Automotive parks its for sale stuff right there. So another unfortunate building we've lost over the years. Like I said, this is either that old building, or one very close by. But yes, we did have an opera house, believe it or not. Speaking of almost opera houses, or something that could be used, 1922 also saw the opening of the Alomar Theater, which could also be used for operas and all that kind of stuff too. And there were several years of going back and forth as to where a new theater was going to be located. A couple different places downtown Live Oak. But what they eventually did was converted an old building on the east side of Howard Street to become the Alomar Theater, and it was opened finally to the public in 1922. These are pictures from the opening day of the Alomar Theater. Now then, the name Alomar comes from a conglomeration of two different names. George Allison and Marvin Price, Dr. Marvin Price. They were the two folks who pretty much owned it and put up a lot of money for it. So George Allison and Marvin Price, Dr. Marvin Price. So they basically had a competition, and that's what somebody wrote into the Democrat. Hey, let's make it this name, and they liked it. That's the one that won, and so it served the community as its major and its biggest theater, indoor theater. Let me rephrase that: indoor theater for some 50 years until it burned down. One of my employees at the clerk's office, her grandfather was a firefighter, and so a few years ago she brought in pictures from the fire that burned it down. So it's very interesting to see the pictures I'd never seen. I knew it burned down, but she actually had the pictures from her deceased grandfather showing them trying to put out the fire, and also all the people that were used in the fire engines and such. So they were nice. They were on the back, so I could actually get information off of it. But it was used for many years. Originally, of course, it was time of segregation, so whites were in one spot, blacks were usually up in the mezzanine level. I've heard different stories over the years as to where they were. But later on, towards its waning years, I was told that they divided it kind of down the middle, and so they made two theaters out of the one big one. But there's lots of records that we have at the clerk's office of them upgrading it, putting sound in for the movies. Instead of being the era of silent films, let's bring all these nice new sounds. They brought in orchestras, they brought in theater troops, those kinds of things. So interesting stuff. 1922, still more stuff going on. Florida Memorial College, we've talked about over the months. One of our two African American colleges here in Suwannee County and in Live Oak at one point. They suffered a major fire in 1922. So we've got buildings being constructed, but we're losing buildings also. And what happened was in May of 1922, the Florida Memorial College lost the old frame study hall. Now, I don't know for sure if this is the building or not. My data on the individual buildings of Florida Memorial is kind of sketchy or spread out. I don't have too much. This building was Suwannee High's first high school. That was built in the 1880s, pretty much where First Baptist is today. The Family Life building, Family Ministry building, the one in the back. That's where it was, and it was the high school for the white folks. Later on, when the Suwannee School Board built a new brick building in 1916, they sold this old wooden structure to Florida Memorial, who had it moved. It's amazing you can move buildings this big, but they did it all the time. They moved it onto their campus a couple blocks to the west, and it was used for various things. So I don't know if this was the building that burned down or one like it, one perhaps like the original almost courthouse in Live Oak that Nathan Walker had built in the 1860s. Discussed that many months ago now. I don't know which building. Anyway, it burned down, and that was not the last major fire at Florida Memorial College. They had another one, I think, in 1935, which destroyed several of their structures. I didn't find a reason as to it. If it was arson, it was just, it happened. I mean, lots of wooden buildings, and these were old, and probably a lot of lighter wood went into building them. So it happens. But 1922 also saw some other destruction all over the county. I don't know, maybe it was serial arsonists that we never found out about. I don't know. Dowling Park and Branford lost their sawmills. They were burned down, and so that was a major economic loss for those communities. Makes you have to think about it. And Dowling Park and Branford, those were the major employers of the community. And so these places burned down, and we have to remember there were not banks all over the place. You couldn't just go down the street and get money. So what a lot of these sawmills had was their own little coinage, so to speak, and you could buy stuff at their commissary. And so if this sawmill burns down, the workers aren't making any money or getting any trinkets, whatever you want to call them, to be able to buy stuff. So it hurt the communities very badly. They rebuilt, but it still hurt. Well, fire got those buildings. The Methodist Church, which was on the northeast corner of Houston and Duval, in 1922 they realized they could no longer use their building. If I recall, there was a lot of termite damage. So fire got the other buildings, termites got this one, and so they had to rebuild it. And they decided to move locations, and they bought a property on South 129. So they laid the cornerstone in July of 1922 for the building you see on the right, which is of course what they still use even today. And the picture on the right was taken in 1958, so it was already 35 years old at that point. Beautiful building. I believe they took some of the windows out of the old building before it was torn down and put them in the newer building. In 1922 or 1923, we see the end of steamboating on the Suwannee River. We've talked about this thing for months. Even prior to the Civil War, we had steamboats on the Suwannee River. And after the Civil War, that was kind of the heyday in the late 1880s and 1890s before a hurricane hit in 1896. And so it waned a little bit, but we still had several steamboats, including the city of Hawkinsville, which was the largest one on the river. And early 1900s, you see automobiles being brought into Suwannee County and the rest of the state, to be honest. You see new bridges being built. You see better roads being built. And so these steamboats are no longer going to be economically feasible to travel on or to even take things, cargo. And so the city of Hawkinsville in the late teens helps to basically bring ships parts down for a bridge down in Old Town in Dixie County. At Old Town. I'll say Old Town. They unload all the supplies and basically they just tie her up along the bank and then she sinks. And what's left of her is still there today. It's a state underwater archaeological preserve. There's a couple of pictures of some of her machinery. So you can still go down there if you have diving certification. And it's not that, it's not that deep. You can see it from the bridge sometimes if the water's just right. But you can go there and you can kind of swim around. The last steamboat that was active on the Suwannee River. So ends of things. You've got things coming in, you've got ends of things like steamboating, but also blacksmith shops, more or less the end of them. 1924, we still have blacksmith shops even in Live Oak, Suwannee County and Live Oak. But one of them was Sam McGee, that's him there with a car. But he shuts down in 1924, basically converts to automobile repairs. And that's what happens to a lot of these blacksmith shops. They kind of convert to garages or something similar. Now, I've been told there are still, for another few decades, there's still one or two blacksmiths out there. But pretty much their heyday is gone. You've got cars. You don't need to be shoeing animals or doing other things with animals as much. You can buy stuff now, it's shipping in from railroads and roads. You don't have to make everything here. You can buy it from Jacksonville, Savannah, places like that. So there's no longer the need for all the blacksmiths. So that's another thing that pretty much more or less dies off in the 1920s. Suwannee County and Live Oak in particular sees a first, and it's actually a first for a lot of the nation, to be honest. Ruby Jordan, as she was born in Reynolds, Georgia, January 11th, 1886. In 1898, her family moves to Suwannee County, and they live at a place called Hudson upon the Swanee, which within a few years becomes Dowling Park. Well, her dad, Wiley, becomes postmaster at Dowling Park in 1906. 2 years later, he basically retires. She takes over as postmistress. So in 1908, she's postmistress of Dowling Park. Well, she marries Dr. Henry Strickland in 1911, and they decide, you know what, there's a lot more to be offered in Live Oak than there is in Dowling Park. So they move to Live Oak and live on Pine Avenue, I believe. She is very active in social circles, things like the Women's Club and such like that. She was president of the Women's Club in the 20s. She also was a member of the Suwannee County Library Board. The old thing, when it was just an old house on the courthouse lot, way back. So she was involved with that. She was also a school board trustee. They had school board members, and then they kind of had like trustees that kind of watched over the buildings and such. She was one of those. Well, the interesting thing about her was in 1924 and again in 1934, she is elected mayor of Live Oak. And by doing so, she becomes the first female mayor south of the Mason-Dixon line after universal suffrage, which had only happened 5 years before. Now, there had been some other female mayors up north. There had been, I think, even a female mayor in Florida before universal suffrage. Some town had said, hey, we'll make you mayor, even though it was not technically, I guess, legal in all places. But in 1919, that amendment was passed to allow women the right to vote. And in 1924, she becomes mayor of Live Oak, which at the time is still a very happening place. It's still a powerhouse in politics and in manufacturing and other things. So she is elected mayor, and again in 1934. So she's I mean, that's big. That's big for Suwannee County, for Florida, for the country. Well, she serves those terms, not sequential. In between that, 1936, she serves as a delegate at large for the entire state of Florida for the Democratic National Convention, which was held in Philadelphia, where they renominated Franklin Roosevelt as president. Now, her husband, her first husband, died in 1936, Dr. Strickland. So she married 2 other times. First time was W.L. Giles of Reidsville, Georgia. They were married for 12 years, and then he died. And then she married Arthur Gould of St. Petersburg, and he died after 7 years of marriage. So, yeah, widowed 3 times. So she called it quits after that point. Men everywhere were probably applauding that. But after 3 times being married, she was living at St. Petersburg, which is where her last husband had been. And she lived there for a few years, but she eventually moved back to Live Oak in 1966. Air conditioning. She moved back to Live Oak in 1966. And I read a funny story years ago. It was from 1978. It was the centennial of Live Oak's incorporation from 1878 to 1978. And there was a big shindig in Live Oak. And Lieutenant Governor of Florida came over. His name was Jim Williams. And he was supposed to be giving a cake to the mayor at the time, who was S.T. McDowell. Well, he gets up there and he sees Ruby up there on stage. She's supposed to deliver, a speech or something. So instead of giving the cake to the mayor, he gives it to her instead. And he gives the mayor like some cufflinks. Consolation prize, I guess. So, kind of funny. Ruby's family stayed in politics. It wasn't just her. Her and her husband's first child was Frances. She married Horry Hare. Horry Hare became a state senator Their son, Maddox Hare, became a state senator. So, and probably by this point, there's probably another person in the family. So several family members in that family were big in state politics. She died in 1985 at Abbott Christian Village at the age of 99. So she had a long, long life. Long life. Sidney, or Sid A. Hindley, sometimes I think I pronounce him Hindley, but usually Hindley, I believe, is the correct pronunciation. He was supposedly the first automobile dealer in Live Oak. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I read that somewhere, so take it for what it's worth. But we know he was an automobile dealership. He also was a building contractor. He was a state senator. He worked for the state road department. Lots of things. He was big into pushing electricity for the local communities. Say, for instance, here in Florida, in Suwannee County, Live Oak had electricity. Branford did until their power burned down. But pretty much Live Oak and Branford had electricity. The rural areas did not, so he was one to try to start pushing that out to the rural areas. He also wanted better education for the citizens, so he was big into that. He actually had an inn called the Suwannee River Camp and Stumble Inn, and that was over in the west side of the county. When he died in 1951, he donated it to the Suwannee River State Park, so that became part of that big park over there. He was also, at his death, the last charter member of the Rotary Club from Live Oak that had been established in the early 20s. His sister, or his wife, his wife was the sister of Governor Hardy. I'll get it out eventually. So, lots of connections there. That happens. Other politicians. We'll talk about him over the next few months. Judge Hal, yeah, you know where I'm talking to. Judge Hal W. Adams was born in Tennessee. He practiced law in Mayo. He moved to Mayo and practiced law there for many years. Starting in 1906, he was elected the Lafayette County judge for 4 different terms. But in 1925, Governor Martin, who was Governor Hardy's successor, he appointed him as a circuit court judge. And he served until 1960 as a circuit judge. We call it the 3rd Judicial Circuit today. Dixie, Lafayette, Taylor, Madison, Hamilton, Columbia, and Suwannee County. He was famous for wearing a bow tie and having a spittoon. He loved to chew tobacco, so he'd use that spittoon all the time. We'll talk about him more in the next few months, trust me. Abbott Christian Village, which had been established in the teens, 1914, 1911. That's when blank. I need to write some of this stuff down instead of going from memory, because sometimes my memory is all it is. Anyway, it had been recently established in the teens, we'll put it that way. Millie's going to kill me when she realizes I've just forgot the year. Anyway, they needed to build. In 1925, the original building burned, wooden building, so what they decided to do was to build a fireproof brick one. The funds mainly came from Miami. There was a wealthy tycoon down there, a real estate tycoon. Well, unfortunately, there was a little bit of a bubble burst in Florida before the Great Depression, but there was a bubble that burst on lands. And so this guy who said he'd pony up a lot of money lost a lot of it, so he could no longer afford to provide. So that building sat there unfinished for several years. It was called Dowling Hall. This one's a different one, that's the Long Hall, but it was similar era and that kind of stuff. So it took several years to finish that building because the bubble burst. The real estate bubble in Florida burst in the mid-20s. Suwannee Country Club, 1926. The 9-hole club was established just east of Live Oak in Houston, the old county seat. And actually the property that they used was the original property that the county commissioners were given. And I believe I brought those original deeds from 1859, one of the earlier presentations. But that property was sold different times, but it became basically the site of the Suwannee Country Club ring. Let's see. A lot of well-known Live Oak and Suwannee County folks. Go through some of them. J.D. Radford, F.D. Heldenston, C.S. Sherman, Dr. W.C. White, Carrie A. Hardy's in there, Sid Heinley, D.K. Clippinger, R.H. Heldenston, H.E. Leach, J.L. Blackwell, S.E. Fleet, H.C. Wynn, E.S. Connor, Joe Heinley, B.W. Heldenston Jr., E.L. Anderson, and C.J. Hackney. Basically, the big wigs in Live Oak and Suwannee County in politics and especially in business. There we go. So it still continues today. We talked about last month and the month before cotton, which had been king in Suwannee County since Civil War era pretty much, had been annihilated by the boll weevil. And so what happens is a lot of the farmers are trying to find another cash crop, something they can make some money off of. And so in 1917, this guy here, who's A.D. Gaskins, and Sheriff W.H. Lyle, those folks go up to the Carolinas and decide, you know what, maybe this tobacco will be a good thing to sell, because up in the Carolinas, who have been cropping tobacco for a couple hundred years at this point, the soil just isn't as good as it used to be. And so it's harder and harder to produce what the farmers need up there. So Lyle and Gaskins say, hey, maybe y'all can come down to Florida, Suwannee County. And so they start growing tobacco here in Suwannee County. They establish in 1925 people like Carrie Hardy, former governor at that point, Carrie Hardy, promote tobacco. They form a company to advertise it and to sell it, and they construct the first of many tobacco warehouses in 1926. It's 100 foot by 320 foot long. One of several. I know there were 8 at one point in one location, just in Live Oak, just off Houston Street. Started selling tobacco. So the first year they sold tobacco, after having built those tobacco warehouses, 700,000 pounds of tobacco flowed through them, just here in Live Oak. In 1926, the Chamber of Commerce, which had again just been recently reestablished, had a sightseeing trip from farmers from Lake City, South Carolina, came down. They were advertised, they were shown, here's the kind of property we've got, here's the land we've got that will grow this tobacco. And so because of that, over 1,000 people moved into Suwannee County just to grow tobacco. The Rotary clubs, the Kiwanis clubs, they all helped to entertain these folks and show them around the town and around the county. So a lot of people moved down to start growing tobacco. A lot of the local farmers started growing tobacco. So that was the cash crop for many decades, till that little thing of cancer popped up. Might be an issue. 1920s, Live Oak, again, no longer the 5th largest city in the state, but still big, still a political powerhouse and business powerhouse. Had several civic groups, I've already talked about a few of them. 2 banks, had machine shops, had a foundry, several saw and planing mills, grist mill, cotton gin, a factory for making tonic for hogs, important stuff there, a meat packing house, a barrel factory, ice and cold storage plant, 2 stockyards, and lots of other stuff. We were still one of the largest cities in the area. We were big in the Lake City still and that kind of stuff. So it was either Live Oak or go to Jacksonville, pretty much. Lake City was growing there. What were some of the businesses coming into Live Oak especially? Suwannee Cold Storage, later became Suwannee Packing Company, or what we call growing up Suwannee Pack, was established in 1920, but it became Suwannee Packing Company in 1926. 1924, Rogers and Osborne. They made concrete building materials. The New Grape Bottling Company, established in 1925. The Knee-High Bottling Company, established in 1928. 1927, Piggly Wiggly came here. 1928, the A&P food store came into Live Oak. Chevrolet, Crowley Chevrolet Company in 1925. 1926, the Studebaker Dexter Motor Company. Any of y'all remember Studebakers? Yeah. 1927, we had a Plymouth dealership, so lots of car dealerships coming in addition to ones we already had, like Allison Ford, owned by George Allison, same guy I've already talked about, and I'll talk about in just a minute. downtown Live Oak for that one. We had the Blues Truck Line, which was established in 1925, long distance hauling of gas and oil. And the guy that owned it was Laverne Blue, who also owned the Blue Lodge, which would be built in the 30s. We'll talk about next month. He also owned the Blue Bus Line, which he established in 1928, and that was a predecessor to the Greyhound. Basically, Greyhound bought it out. But it was a bus line for transportation. So lots of people moving in and building in Live Oak, especially, beyond those tobacco farmers moving into the county. Other things, the Mercer Building. This building here is built in 1927 on Howard Street. The original structure, I believe, was wooden and either probably burned down, might have been torn down. But it was replaced by this brick building. Originally, you can almost read it. I took a picture through glass, big mistake. So the flash you can see, but it was the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company and New York Tailors was its original business there. But over the years, it's had lots of different ones. Places like Sears and Roebuck, the Stephen Foster Hotel. It's now Sherman Friars Surveyors, and also a consignment shop. So that's that location, West Howard, just west of the Ohio Avenue interchange or intersection. Other things, 1927. So we have 22, a lot of stuff being built. 1927, some things are being built, including a new high school. So we had that original two-story wooden one I showed you a little while ago. 1916, it's replaced by a brick structure. Well, by 1927, they need something else. They need something bigger. And so they build this new high school, which is called the Metcalf School after the long-term principal, H.G. Metcalf. He was actually in that picture of the soccer team I showed you earlier. Should have pointed him out to you. But they named it after him, unofficially kind of thing. But it was used as the high school through 1964 when Hurricane Dora hit. And that kind of messed up the foundation. And they stopped using it. And then it was left vacant for about 30 years before it was torn down in the late 90s, I think, early 2000s. I was an adult pretty much when it happened, so it was there for a while, abandoned. Other buildings, same year, 1927. Branford gets a new school. They needed something bigger, they needed something better, so they get a new school. Leon Hatch, who was a longtime resident of Branford, big into politics, big into especially the businesses down there. He was a student, and years ago he talked about it in a recording that he had done. And basically, they had to fence off the school because there were free-roaming cows and hogs. So they had to fence off the school, not to keep the kids in, but to keep the cows and hogs out, for number one. Number two, they had no air conditioning. You remember that, 70 years later. Let's see. They had a coal-fired boiler. There was no auditorium, or there was an auditorium upstairs. There was no lunchroom. Kids just went home. They walked home. They were close enough. They could just go home. I believe I mentioned this 2 or 3 months ago. Suwannee County has gone through several different eras of bridge building. We had the original vehicle bridge building, let me rephrase that, in the early 1900s, 1902 to about 1914 or so, was that first era of vehicle bridges. Well, starting in the 1920s, you have a second era of bridge building, and this one pretty much starts it off, the Hillman Bridge. The Ellenville Bridge had been built in 1908. It had outlived its usefulness. They needed something better. And so they built this bridge, completed, I think, 1926. This is a picture from 1927. And so they built it. It's still there today. If you look, it's called Hillman Bridge up here. But look how they spelled Suwannee. Suwannee County has been around at this point for 70 years, and they still don't always spell it right. It's got S-U-W-A-N-E-E. They left out an N. So they still can't figure out at the state level how to spell the county. But this bridge is used for many years. And it's named after the W.J. Hillman that we've already talked about, the guy who was big in the state road department. It's used for 50 so years before a new one is built. And this is now part of the Suwannee River State Park. It's a walking trail. You can go on it today. So we've got all this progress going on. We've got all these innovations coming in, all these better things. But yet, in some ways, we're still kind of backwards. We're still Wild West of sorts. Gunfights, several gunfights happened even in the 1920s. One of the most notorious ones, I guess, is Bully Bob Sullivan. He is a very prosperous turpentine distiller over in Perry, one of the Taylor County bunch. But he comes over to Suwannee County a lot. Well, he is gunned down in 1927, downtown Live Oak with a shotgun. He deserved it, I'll be honest, he deserved it. The man had killed lots of people. He had lost count of how many black people he'd killed. He didn't even consider them human beings. Like, I've killed a bunch of white folks and then a bunch of these other ones. He had killed many people. Basically, he was a very businessman-looking individual. He was dressed nicely, dressed to the nines. He looked like a businessman, which he was, but you cross him, there's a good chance you're going to die. And that's kind of what happened was. He had killed the father of a guy named Eugene McLean. Basically, they had a little tussle and he had killed him. Well, when Eugene grew up, Sullivan threatened him, saying, I'm going to kill you like I killed your dad. Eugene said no. So he had a shotgun and put an end to Bully Bob Sullivan's life and his killings. That's even though he had a bulletproof vest on. Obviously, he missed the vest. It's not the last gunfight we have in the streets of Live Oak or Suwannee County. This is, I found this years ago, thought it was funny. I must warn you, I'm the fastest gun west of the Rio Grande. Wow. Unfortunately, we're 5 miles east of the Rio Grande. Fun stuff. Now, here is part of the article talking about it. It goes into lots of detail. See, Eugene McLean acquitted of murder of Sullivan after sensational trial. So all kinds of people are being interviewed, or witnesses, just a whole fun thing. I think I've got a relative that was one of the jurors on there. So very interesting. But he was acquitted, justifiable, because he'd been threatened. That was his life that had been threatened, and the guy had already killed his dad. So that was 1927. 1928, we see the flood of 1928. We have lots of the floods of whatever years. In 1928, we see this one. Heavily damages the areas along the Suwannee River. This picture is Ellaville, which is now the Suwannee River State Park. That's the railroad bridge. Places like Ellaville, Branford, Dowling Park, Suwannee Springs are hit with flooding, August of 1928. Not the first time, won't be the last time, but I've got a couple of pictures to show you. That's the old vehicle bridge looks like at Ellaville. So the one that had just been replaced a year or two before, it's still there, but I mean, you can't even drive up to it. And if you can look carefully, you'll see it's one of that first generation of bridges that was a steel structure and wood flooring. Yeah, not good. That's the Hillman Bridge that had just been completed a year or two before. Look how high the water is. But it didn't get over the bridge, just close. Another picture of Ellaville on, I believe that's the Madison County side, one of the garages over there. That's Dowling Park, flooding in the downtown area of Dowling Park, if you will. So lots of flooding there. Not the first time, not the last time. Lots of flooding. We see some more endings in 1928. We've talked about steamboats, we've talked about blacksmith shops by and large. But the Welborn Bank, which had been established in the early 1900s, is bought out in 1928. It is sold to the commercial bank, who is run by former Governor Kerry Hardy. he's able to buy up several banks over the years. Well, basically, the owner, who's Dr. Smithson at the time, comes to an understanding with Carey Hardy that, all right, I'll sell to you, but my cashier, Merle Jernigan, is going to be working for you now. You can't let him go. So they agreed. He's going to continue in that same position as basically the clerk, the cashier. And so what they did was on Christmas Day of 1928, they moved all the money, they moved all the records to Live Oak. And so they opened up for business like normal the next day, with Merle Jernigan there as the cashier. That picture is the home of E.B. McLaren, who was the guy that established the Wilmer Bank in the early 1900s, I think 1910. And last I saw it was being used as a bed and breakfast over in Wilmer. So, let's see what else. Churches. Several churches were established in Suwannee County in the 1920s. Others built new buildings. This one, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I want to talk about this one because it's kind of funny. Not politically correct, I guess we could say. But it's just interesting when you read history. And I'm always one of those who, history is what it is, good, bad, or different. You can learn from it. You can take it or leave it, but it is what it is. This is the Pine Mountain Baptist Church, established in 1928 on 129 South, close to McAllen. Several groups, like the church members themselves, could not build a new building. And this is a later structure. This is not the one we're talking about. But when they were established, there were not enough members with enough money to build their own structure. So they decided, like a lot of other groups in the county, let's go in together. Often it was a church and a Masonic lodge. Out in Rocky, same thing happened. There's a couple other places. So that's what they did. They went in with a couple of local groups. And so they went in with, the Baptist church went in with the local Masonic lodge, and they still didn't have enough funds. So hey, let's go in with the local KKK. So let's build a church building using all those funds. And so this building was constructed partly with the original building with KKK funds and members. So pretty much the church would meet on certain days, the Masonic lodge would meet on other days, and the KKK would meet. So it happened, but this one was funny because of that. Again, not that structure. I think that's one they still have today, but the original probably wooden structure. So I found that interesting. Interesting. Again, not something you would see done today. Definitely not today. Suwannee Democrat gets sold several times over the years. Established in 1899. They're consolidated in 1897. So there were several different newspapers over the years. 1897 it becomes a Suwannee Democrat. In 1929 it is sold to a guy named Charles P. Helfenstein. Not Helvenston, but Helfenstein. And he purchased it plus that brick building that it's located in, which is now Millennium Park, because it burned down. Was burned down. That was arson in the 1990s. So he bought that. He's a native of Pennsylvania. He had been in the newspaper business ever since he had been in Yale, at Yale University. He was part of their newspaper publishing staff. And so he bought it, owned it for several years. At the same time, there is another newspaper that is established in Suwannee County called the Suwannee Citizen, and it's printed by J.E. Pound. J.E. Pound is the guy that merged the older magazines to create the Suwannee Democrat. So pretty much J.E. Pound owned the Suwannee Democrat, sells it off, and a few decades later decides, you know what, I'm going to start up another newspaper in Live Oak in Suwannee County. So he establishes it. Now, his office is in the Masonic Lodge. That one we just showed you a little while ago. So he uses that as his office for his newspaper. It runs for, 10, 15 years. But at the time, we've still got a few newspapers here in Suwannee County. Well, we're humming along in the 1920s. Lots of good things happening. Some bad, but lots of good things. And then in 1929, we had the stock market crash, which leads to the Great Depression, which leads to a lot of bad things. And not just our country, but the entire world. If there's anything fortunate to be said about it, is Suwannee County was already kind of poor, most of the people, and very rural. So they were not as impacted as heavily as, say, New York City if you're a stockbroker, you know, you hear stories about some of them jumping out of windows. That happened a few times. I have not read of anything like that happening here that I know of. Of course, I've also noticed in events or obituaries that I do know what really happened to people. They don't just spell it out, oh, the guy jumped out of a building to kill himself. It's more of like, died suddenly. You see a lot of that sometimes. And this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it. But 1929 sees George Allison die. I'm not saying, please don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting he committed suicide. I'm just saying he did die in 1929, December. I think it was an illness, actually, if you go back and look at the records. It just, chronologically, it just segued into that, and I'm sorry, and I mean no offense to the Allison family. I've known several members over the years, probably related to them. So I'm not suggesting in any way that he committed suicide. But he did die in December of 1929. Prominent businessman, prominent civic leader. He leaves a wife and several children. He's the guy that helped start the Rotary Club. He ran the Allison Motor Company, helped establish the Alomar Theater, lots of stuff in Suwannee County, especially Live Oak. That's his house that still stands today. He had pretty much renovated it totally just a few years before he passed away. And it burned, and I can't tell whether it totally burned or just partially burned. They repaired it and made it look like it is today. But his wife was still rather young, and she lived as a widow for the next 50, 60 years as a widow. So again, he just happened to die that same year. I'm not suggesting, please don't think that. If you're watching any Allison family member, I'm not suggesting that, and I'm sorry. 1930 rolls around, and this map actually is from 1932. It's the closest I could find. As you can see, if you compare that from the one at the beginning of the presentation, there are a lot less communities listed on here. Also, the old Florida Railway, which went from Live Oak down to Wilmarth and DeMayo area, that had already stopped running in 1920, but it was still showing up on that first map. Plus a lot of towns along it. Well, they're all gone. Plus a lot of even the LOPNG, Live Oak Perry and Gulf, it goes from Live Oak through Dowling Park. Most of those places like Mercer and Starr, they're also gone. You still see New Bern. And so as we get to this point, and from this point on, pretty much most of the communities that are on this map are still around today in some form or fashion. Now Emerson's not, Hildreth really, it's a location, people know where it is, but it's not a community per se. I think there's a Dollar Tree or one of those dollar stores that was recently built there. But most of these are going to continue to last at this point because the little ones are gone. And that's unfortunate, it's just part of how it is. So, next month, 1930s. Any questions, comments? I should have reworded that or moved it. It just happened to, chronologically, that's what happened. All right, well, thank y'all for coming, appreciate it. And hopefully see y'all